For those who are in HR department of one, do you trust your employees to remain absolutely compliant with wage and hour laws, like logging their times correctly, not reporting overtime, or missing rest breaks? Well, today, SHRM's Jennifer Chang and I will be covering how to educate your employees on compliance-related matters and trust that they will follow suit. Let's get into it. Reality is that a lot of employees actually are pretty educated on, compliance laws, wage and hour laws, overtime laws, and there's a slew of lawsuits that you see within hourly wage industries that support this. So it's making sure that they're actually well educated on your side of things, but to help stay compliant as a company. So feeds me great into my next point on how to educate employees on compliance related matters. So talking about, turnover, I think it's a really important part. Let me share my screen really quickly. So if we're looking at this next slide, if it loads, there we go. So looking at compliance education tips and tricks and really kind of simply breaking it down and do, the first one being utilize real life examples and storytelling. Again, there is so much, so many lawsuits out there that support these findings on, making sure that your employees are well educated on why they should remain compliant. Number two, engaging employees from the top down, managers to frontline staff, making sure that they're constantly communicating with their frontline staff. Number three, don't be afraid to enforce accountability. I think that this is something, especially as solo HR departments feel like they're constantly the bad guy. I think making sure that you're so comfortable with enforcing accountability is absolutely huge. So Jennifer, my question for you is, what sort of protocol or practice should HR have in place to actually help educate employees on important compliance protocols and principles, considering, time constraints as they are the only ones.
They are.
Right? So they only have so much time to sit everybody down and talk to them. But what would you recommend here?
I would recommend, there's a couple options. It depends on the budget for an HR department and a company as a whole. One would be to outsource these compliance training requirements and have someone external come in and conduct the training and also develop the training, because developing the training can be time consuming as well. So to have someone come in and provide perhaps the sexual harassment training compliance requirements every year, that might be a great option. Or involving managers, as you alluded to, and other executives, so that the HR department of one isn't doing everything. Like perhaps the manager, like the HR department, could develop the training materials, but the manager could provide the slideshow. And they don't necessarily have to actually give the presentation, but if they could send it out to everybody and ensure that everyone's taking care of it, just really involving other people. I think that's something that's super important for an HR department of one, so that they're not the one developing the training, managing the training, and making sure that everyone is trained.
Absolutely. Again, partnering with managers, with other teams is absolutely important. Do you recommend, any e-learning tools or like digital platforms, any technological solutions that can actually help deliver this training that we're looking for with employees?
I don't have any direct recommendations. I will plug SHRM, of course, because we do offer sample training presentations that are already developed. Now they're kind of at the federal level, so an employer might need to tailor them to their state-specific regulations. But 90% of the presentation is already written, and that is available to our members so that they don't have to recreate the wheel. I think a lot of folks get overwhelmed by the fact that they have to actually create a training presentation in addition to giving the presentation and ensuring compliance. So that's taken care of. And state websites, like Department of Labor websites for each state that do have specific training requirements, often will have sample presentations available as well. So that's a resource to look at.
That's awesome. I like the idea of bringing in someone external, even if it's for a day to just audit practices, and then they give the recommendations on, hey, you guys need to tighten up here. You guys need to make sure that people are clocking in, clocking out on time, whatever it is that they recommend, and enforcing that, and maybe doing that a quarter, maybe even twice a year, whatever it might be that fits for your company's needs. We actually have the safety management feature that just got released, and it's not so much on the FLSA side of things, it's more on the OSHA side of things, where making sure that, obviously customers, employees are safe. And again, putting the power in the manager's hands a little bit more and handing that off to them and saying, okay, here's a checklist, here's a safety management checklist that you need to make sure that your employees are going through. And they can assign these checkpoints to their employees, to their frontline staff. And it's just that continuous education. And again, bringing somebody in and saying, hey, where does this checklist, or what does this checklist need to have on it? Where are we lacking a little bit in terms of FLSA compliance, OSHA compliance, whatever it might be that you're concerned about? And then applying it to your technology and automating it. I think that's super important. And again, handing it off to those who are in the management side of things, trusting your employees with the matters, and just making sure that everyone's kind of all hands on deck.
Yeah, I think to your point, I think it's really important to explain the why behind all of these compliance issues, because someone might be like, oh, why do I have to fill out my timesheet? You're just going to pay me anyway. But it really explaining why that needs to be done and the regulation behind it, I think it's really helpful to employees to understand the importance of all of these nitty-gritty little things that we might be asking them to take care of.
I think that's such a good point. And you don't want to overwhelm, right? You never want to overwhelm the other teams and saying, hey, make sure that we're doing this and this. At the end of the day, that's on HR. But again, I think making sure that there is continuous improvement and education is super important. Do you have any recommendations on kind of creating that culture of continuous education that smaller HR teams can establish?
Sure. So one option might be to, it all starts from the top down, right? So, fostering that continuous education piece might look like providing time to employees. And this kind of goes to the employee relations side of things, but providing time for them to have their own continuous education. It doesn't necessarily to be compliance issues. It could be something that they need, to better their career or a new certification. So kind of attacking it from all sides, just fostering that continuing education piece for the employee, and then also setting those requirements for compliance as well. We are all learning and growing, we need to continue to do better, and just kind of having that mindset.
Yeah, I love that. And we talked about outsourcing, some of these laws, regulation, compliance protocols, and making sure that, hey, it's double checked. And I think that's really important. But for those that might not have that resource or, that access, do you have any recommendations on how HR can actually assess the effectiveness of their compliance training programs as, a department of one?
Sure. One idea, this is straight from SHRM, but one idea is we have compliance checklists available. So download those and just go through the list to make sure that all the boxes are ticked. Another option, kind of to go back to your OSHA piece of the conversation, is often state OSHA departments will come in and do an assessment for free. And I know that might be scary, because you don't necessarily want to invite OSHA in to assess everything, but it's kind of a visit from an OSHA department, to a friendly visit, just to assess everything and see where they are. So if there's not any monetary resources to buy, a consulting session or something like that, that might be a good option.
Yeah, I love that. We actually, in a couple days or so, we are going to record our How to Prevent OSHA lawsuits with Liz Peterson over at SHRM.
I love Liz. She's fantastic. She'll probably say the same thing.
I'm so excited to work with her. She is super knowledgeable on the topic, but exactly. OSHA compliance is a whole nother beast that we'll attack another day, but it's really interesting that you mentioned the free audits that they actually offer. And I think it's so important to use those resources, again, especially those smaller companies that don't necessarily have the finances to outsource and, look to a legal team, anything like that. And looking at those free resources, I think self-auditing, getting somebody else to audit, having an outside perspective, whatever it is,
Mhm.
super, super important.
It is.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And it's worth the time to do it, I think, just to
Yeah.
make sure that everything's set right and working well.
No doubt about that. I completely agree. To close out, I love to ask all my guests this question. What are 1 or 2 top tips, actions, or takeaways our audience can leave with to, in this case, better stay compliant when they're an HR department of one?
Oh, sure. Okay, so the first thing is to take one thing at a time, especially if you're walking into some place that hasn't had HR yet. My uncle always says, where there is chaos, there is opportunity. And I tell my HR folks that when they call in. So start there. You have an opportunity to shine and develop a wonderful compliance program. Another thing is to start by making things right going forward. So create those processes so that future employees and future processes are correct and compliant, and then clean up the mess if there is one. Yeah, that would be my biggest tip. And take a deep breath. It will get done, I promise you.
Thank you so much for watching that segment from our webinar on how to stay compliant when you're an HR department of one. If you would like to watch the full webinar, click this video here and be sure to subscribe for more content like this.